Welcome back to the Property Strategy Podcast. You're here with your host, Joey DeGarda. Today, I am sitting down with the great man, Adam Fahey from Actuate Property. Mate, it's a privilege to have you on the podcast. How are you going?
Mate, it's a privilege being here. No, going well.
That's the way. That's the way. Mate, for our listeners who may or may not have come across you across social media, LinkedIn and other platforms, you might just give us a little bit of a background to yourself, business, wherever you come from.
Yeah, sure. So I run a business called Actuate Property. So we're based in Sydney, family business. So it's myself and my partner, Marcella. We've been sort of going for about 3 years now.
Lovely.
Where have I come from? I've come from the old corporate world, specialised in property development, sort of asset management and construction as well. Got a bit jaded. Early parts of COVID, just thought, I'm 20 years into the corporate sort of life now.
20 years?
Nearly,
wow,
20
okay.
years.
Yeah, nice.
So mixture of sort of, your big sort of ASX companies out there and spent a bit of time in the not-for-profit sector, doing some values-based work in property as well.
Yep.
But was always a bit of a go-to for just property investing and just general advice from family and friends. So, so if friends were looking at buying a property, that they'd always tend to navigate to me for a bit of advice.
Natural segue
into, I started out, when I started the business, it wasn't as a buyer's agent. The first few months was more consulting.
Okay.
And then naturally I just thought, I saw the buyer's agent sort of industry started to take off and grow. And I just thought, why not make this, a good segue into running my own business and going the whole hog into it.
Yeah, nice. And obviously coming from a somewhat property related background, I imagine would have helped with a couple of decades of experience in the industry.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, nice. So if we're now starting to form a bit of a picture as to who Adam is, but can you take us back to, and I always ask all of the guests this, can you take us back to that very first acquisition? So you said you've kind of been a bit of a beacon, a shining light for family and friends as you're starting out the investing journey, but let's rewind the clock to when was it? What was it? How much was it? Talk to us about that first acquisition in the portfolio.
Yeah, definitely. So, so Northwestern Sydney, 2006. God, if we'd all liked a time machine and go back there and buy property.
Buy everything.
We'd just be buying streets of stuff, right? So, started and look, and I was a bleary-eyed first home buyer, always scrolling,
newspaper flicking probably.
Newspaper clippings. Homes Pictorial was big that day. For some of our listeners who might remember that, Homes Pictorial used to come out, I think, on a Wednesday or a Thursday. It'd be about 200 pages. It'd cover the region there. You'd be looking in there. You'd be on the landline calling agents. Yeah, so
that first purchase, when you said you were first home buyer, was it for a first home, or was it an investment lens? What was the thought process behind that acquisition?
it was first home. Look, at the time, there's obviously been best part of over 20 years of first home buyer schemes.
Yep.
I think at the time I was trying to reflect on this earlier. No stamp duty, which
no stamp duty
then, and a $7,000 grant on top.
You got money. So don't pay us stamp duty. We'll give you cash.
Yeah.
Were there, we're going back a couple of years, but were there parameters in and around it? Like, could you, was it like income assessed, or just if you were buying your first home, that's what you had access to? You don't remember?
Look, I think at the time it was just if you were a legitimate first home buyer, you'd never owned property in Australia before. You'd get a nice big check for $7,000. It was amazing. So there's
your new TV and some move-in costs covered on the way in.
Yeah, and then later on there was obviously the baby bonuses and stuff, which is I mean, there was a lot of listeners would obviously some of the older listeners remember that the baby bonuses were sort of I think JB Hi-Fi's share price at the time went through the roof with plasma screens. So but no, it was looking back now, it was these are back in the days when the median house price in Sydney was probably a few $100,000. So it was probably sitting around that $500,000 to $600,000 mark back then, maybe a little bit, about 600,000, I think, from memory.
Yep.
It's probably around the time when the median house price of Perth was almost touching Sydney's, believe it or not.
Wow.
So that was really the last sort of massive boom that happened in Perth at the time. So it was interesting, but purchase price, wait for it, $415,000.
415.
I mean, you can't even buy.
Was it a 1-bed unit?
It's a 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom, double garage home.
Yeah, wow.
On 470 square meters, I think. So
for 450.
Yeah, I mean, you can't even buy a termite infested, weatherboard clad thing out in the sticks now for that. No way.
So, wow. Okay, so that property there, we paid 415.
Got a bit of cash back from the government as well.
Got a bit of cash back, so 408 effective thereabouts. Now, what would that property be worth fast forward 19, 20 years?
You're probably sitting now probably about the 1.5, 1.6 mark.
Yeah, beautiful.
Yeah.
And that would just be like compounding growth on top of compound. I'm sure it would have had its peaks and its troughs, but
yeah,
overall a really consistent performer.
Yeah, and I think and look, that area at the time, I mean, we were sort of thinking a little bit strategically because it's in the Northwest Growth Corridor. Anyone who's listening knows Northwestern Sydney. It was a time when Rouse Hill Town Centre was actually under construction. So we bought strategically for that. There'd been promises of the Northwest Rail Link, going back into the mid-90s. It had been promised for years, but as we all know, if you're familiar with Northwestern Sydney, the Northwest Rail or the Metro there's been sort of in operation for 5-6 years now. And I think all that infrastructure development and not only housing, but obviously the infrastructure, retail, it all goes along with it. So
beautiful. So obviously it would be worth an extra $1 million over that hold period there. So that's really, really cool. And that just shows the value of buying really good quality property and holding it for the long run.
That's right. Yeah. You always play the long game with property. I always say to my clients that property is a get rich slow scheme. Yeah.
It's interesting you say that because there are plenty of kind of commentators out there in the space that like to, I don't know, market it as something that it's not. I'm a huge believer of the exact same thing.
Yep.
Get rich really slow scheme. And in fact, there might be a bit of a slog in the early days where maybe the cash flow is not as fabulous as you'd like to be. Yep. But that's probably not a bad segue into your personal and maybe like business investment philosophy overall in terms of like, how would you be, I'm Joe Blow that walks in the door, I'm starting to build out my portfolio. What are the overall kind of frameworks and what are the overall objectives with respect to investing in property? Like, do you have a bit of an overarching thesis that you might be able to share with some of the listeners for like that first time buyer?
Yeah. Oh, look, it's interesting because, I mean, on reflection, I mean, just back to that sort of journey is that, that was the first home. There was an opportunity to buy a half share in my grandparents' house, which, it suited my sort of risk appetite at the time. I mean, I was sort of, had a growing family at the time. I was in Seven Hills, so in Western Sydney.
Yep.
So, I think that was my philosophy is that, being in the backyard, literally, with the first investment, half share, that half share, mind you, was...
Did you execute on that?
Yes.
Yep.
Yes.
Was that mates rates because it was family owned?
No, it was all at arm's length.
Okay.
So I had a valuation done.
Yep.
Yeah. So I think my half share was about $190,000. So there you go. Sub 400,000 again in Sydney. That was around the GFC. Obviously, we can talk about interest rates then. So interest rates did a bit of a spike into the GFC. So I remember paying about 9% interest at the time, just before Lehman Brothers popped, and
had you owned before? Like, did you go into the GFC owning that asset? Obviously, you had your
had
your
the PPOR. Unfortunately, we'd fixed in for 3 years in 2006, so we're only paying I think 9% for about 8 months or something. Before rates started coming down. But I think at the time the investment loan on that was probably about 8.5% or something like that. So I think that whole sort of mindset changed. Like, okay, well, we're investing now, and there's obviously some tax benefits in that. Like, it was just a whole new domain. So, and look, buyers agents weren't really a thing back then either. So you'd almost just almost suck it and see, dip the toe in. And
I mean, there are worse first crack attempts at investing than buying 50% of a home in Seven Hills, right?
Yeah.
I imagine like that would have performed fairly well for you over that period, even with the blip of the GFC as well.
Yeah. So that's I actually sold that earlier this year. We're sort of jumping ahead a bit now, but
that's okay. So 195 was our entry point. What did we have at the other side of that upon sale?
1.24
was your share.
That was a consolidated share. There was so basically due to a life event. I mean, I went through a divorce 10 years ago. Had obviously a financial separation, and then basically got left with a half share of Seven Hills.
Gotcha.
And the other shareholder was my mum.
Yep.
Who's still with us. G'day, mum, if you're listening. But so again, arm's length transaction there to take full ownership of that property.
Wow. Okay. So obviously it's performed beautifully over that period as well. Because what year did you acquire the half share?
2009.
Yeah. Beautiful.
Yeah. And then sort of had another property 2014, so that was only about a 2-year hold, but that was essentially a break even. Again, that was in sort of Sydney as well. So
obviously, like some of these, when we talk about like property planning and planning to build this portfolio, you don't ever really ever plan to go, I'm gonna plan for a marriage breakdown and a financial separation.
No, that's right. But I think when I'm planning with clients now, like it's about having that real strategic framework about, okay, well, we're doing some modeling on today's terms, right? So, and look, we build some linear assumptions in to the modeling, but there's a lot of what if moments as well.
Yep.
So, yeah, a common one, you know, because I work with a lot of young people. I'm sure, Joe, you work with a lot of younger people as well that are setting out and starting, you know, that foundation of property investing, is that they might be single. We might be doing numbers on sole incomes at the moment. You know, the most common life event is, well, what happens if you partner up?
Yep.
And then, so obviously there's going to be a bit of an income jump there.
But a perfect example of that only just today, right? When we were having a look at that with a mutual client.
Exactly.
And you could see that serviceability jump increase, and it happened to be in the right time where that client was ready for that. I think it might have been their third investment. So they were able to get into two.
Yep.
And then with the introduction of a partner income, well, then the serviceability increased through there. And the other one that you mentioned, only was on the call with the client earlier as well, was the other thing of, well, and I think that that individual in particular was, like, for example, fresh out of uni, or, do you know what I mean? Like very early on in their career, and not really factoring in, well, you actually probably will go through a season of some significant pay increases. I think you kind of mentioned that on the call. Yeah,
that's right. I mean, I just know, like personal reflection as well, is that, you know, when you're in your early 20s, you know, you're trying to get that sort of graduate role, or even if you're on the tools as a trader, you've done your apprenticeship, there's a big jump up. You know, naturally you'll have exponential growth in your earnings capacity, you know, right the way through your 40s. They say that your 40s is your prime earning capacity before things start to drop off a little bit, depending on what you're doing, of course. But yeah, it's sort of factoring that in as well. So, but the other thing that, I mean, in this day and age, obviously, you know, I've been talking some pretty wild numbers about buying properties in Sydney, and for the most part, a lot of capital cities in Australia now are just unaffordable, without a doubt. So we're seeing, obviously, rent vesting becoming a very contemporary trend of ownership of property in Australia, unlike what our parents did. You know, you buy the property, you pay the
and that's it,
and that's it. And then you get to retirement age and
take the pension and be happy.
That's it, until you're forced to downsize and into aged care or seniors living, whatever it might be. But yeah, I think, and on that sort of on that point there, what we do see quite often is that you have these aspirational people that, you know, go on pretty aggressive sort of acquisitions. You know, they might go and buy 2 or 3 properties in those sort of first 5 years, partner up, so earnings capacity doubles. They might have another one in there. They hit maximum capacity and they say, oh, we want to buy a PPR now. So that's what I really like to stress test at the outset as well.
And map out. What are your personal beliefs with that whole rent vesting strategy? Because I know people are pro and against it. I see the validity in both sides of the conversation. But what are your thoughts on that?
Look, I think if I was sort of in my 20s today, I would definitely be rent vesting. I'm a big advocate for it.
Yeah, nice.
I just think because of just asset values now, to live in a capital city, just relative to incomes, it's just unaffordable. And, you know, you are hamstrung to that mortgage.
Yep.
So you're basically locked in. And look, you know, rightly or wrongly, there are, you know, government incentive schemes now that are incentivizing people to just get themselves into huge amounts of debt. But the reality is that, you know, I'm a big advocate for rent vesting because the flexibility is there. Yeah. You can build wealth, which traditionally was done through the own home that you live in. But yeah, the contemporary way, you buy, you know, in affordable locations, scale a portfolio, but live somewhere that suits your lifestyle. And obviously, you know, you've almost got to game the rental system in some ways and try to ensure that I guess that's the whole thing with rent vesting. The downside is you've got no control over that, but you have a control to a degree.
Yeah, of course. And some people like that additional flexibility of being able to move, whether it's for school catchment zones, whether it's for lifestyle, whether it's for employment, whether actually even prefer that whole, I'd get bored being in the same home for 20 years. I want the ability to move around. But you point out there, like, obviously that the huge restriction is, or you could be asked to vacate the premise when you want to stay there. Yeah.
I am also seeing a lot of what I call the stay vesting concept.
Explain, please.
Yeah, so stay at home with mum and dad as long as you can.
Okay.
You know, you might pay a little bit of board.
Yeah,
but
I love this model, by the way. It's something that I employed myself personally.
Yeah, but you know, you're basically you're at your optimal expenditure or cost base, I like to call it. So what is your cost base? You might have some, your running costs for your car. You might have some
dining out
costs,
or whatever else.
Dining out. But if you're really frugal with your money, you don't have that big overhead of rent and everything else that goes with it. So, provided you've got nice parents,
of course, yeah.
And I think because everything's unaffordable in capital cities now, there's definitely that, that generation of sort of, the Gen Zs and the Gen Alphas. They're going to be living at home. I know. Look, I've got 2 kids, 16 and 13. They're probably going to be living with me for much longer than what I probably lived with my parents for.
Yeah, and I think even like for myself personally, when I was in my early 20s, there was a bit of a stigma around, oh, you live at home with mum and dad, and I was like, yeah, I do. And guess what? I save a shit ton of money, and you don't. But then I think it was maybe COVID that maybe broke the cycle where everyone was going, well, we can't afford to stay renting. We're all going to move back home. And now it's become the norm. So it might be in fashion now.
Yeah, that's right. And it's funny because I hear sort of young people talk about, if they live at home or live in their own rental or a share rental. And it's more of the comment now, how do you afford it?
Yeah. It was before it was like a stigma, like, oh, you're a loser. What are you doing staying at home with mum and dad? And now it's like, why aren't you living with mum and dad? Why aren't you saving up cash?
Yeah.
So let's go back to this kind of overall overarching strategy in terms of building out this portfolio now. So we've come in, we've sat down and we've kind of mapped in some of these life events. What does that that big piece look like for you? Is it a come in and max out your borrowing capacity and just go and buy one fabulous growth asset and disregard the yield, or go out there and go and buy the highest yielding property that you can find? Is it a balanced approach? What do you kind of see the way to go for the investment? Obviously, everyone has their own story, but just someone coming in off the street, first time investor.
Yeah, look, it's I do a lot of qualification with anyone that wants to come and be assisted by my business. So I do a lot of excavation, a lot of digging about what they want out of it, what their budget is, do they want to be a slumlord with 20 properties, or they're a bit more realistic? Because it's obviously a factor of your earnings potential as well. So that's I've got to be the bearer of bad news that if you're on a modest income, you're not going to be able to afford 20 properties. And always, even if you can afford it, I mean, it comes back to me. I mean, at any one time, I've probably had 3 or 4 properties in my portfolio. And that's enough.
Yeah. I was going to say, do you need 20?
You don't.
Yeah.
You don't. And I think we've proved it day in, day out, that if you're very methodical in what you do and very disciplined with income and savings, all you need is 3 or 4 solid properties.
For the unless your goals are ridiculous.
Yeah.
If your goals are somewhere 100 to 150K in today's dollars, we've seen that, stress tested it on countless number of times. It usually is that kind of between 3 and 4 assets that actually get you to that end outcome.
Yeah.
Take me on that journey. How do I get there?
Yeah. So usually, I mean, what I like to do, so say hypothetically, if someone comes to me and goes, right, Adam, I've spoken with a broker, he's run the numbers, pretty sure we'll get pre-approved for, say, $800,000.
Yep.
Okay. Well, that's a good starting budget. Generally what I do is say, right, well, whilst you have $800,000 to spend, I don't want to go and spend that, off the bat. I like that you've still got a bit of fuel in the tank, to give you that head start for that sort of second property, because building a portfolio from scratch, you do want to get some really solid foundational properties early on. You don't want to exhaust your borrowing capacity from day one, because I think we've proven that, over time and time again, that you go and put all your eggs in one basket as well. It's not necessarily good for diversification, but it might leave you on the sidelines for longer as well.
Yeah.
And that's that opportunity cost as well, is that, yes, that asset might be going up in value, but to scale a portfolio, you need serviceability.
And that's one thing that people don't really think about all that much, right?
Yeah. So, and I think that whole concept of equity comes at a cost. So equity is just a fancy word for paper debt.
Taking on more debt.
On more debt. So it's got to come from somewhere.
Do you find it's a challenge for people to go, oh, I've got whatever, $1 million to spend, yet I'm only going to spend $650 psychologically for them to go, well, I've got the borrowing, why don't I max myself out?
Look, a lot of them, you do get some people that are open to it, but some people want you to unpack that a little bit more. And I think in where property markets are in Australia at the moment, I mean, $800,000, if you're lucky, is going to get you into probably 2 or 3 capital cities around the country at the moment. Maybe more, depending on what asset type. I'm a big advocate for a good land component with improvements on the land. So ideally that's going to be a house. But I'm for investment purposes, I'm not a fan of strata at all.
Mm-hmm.
Commercial's different story.
Yep.
But yeah, for residential property, it's got to have a good land component, good usable land, and a good asset. So, and then it comes down to risk appetite aligning with that budget as well, and that's where you'll start spitting out locations.
Yep.
And then you could there's so much, and I think as buyers agents and property investors these days, we're actually spoiled with the amount of data around.
Too much almost.
There's probably too much. It almost is analysis paralysis.
Yep.
Is that there's data doing this, there's data doing that, but ultimately it comes back down to the basics, right? So back to the home's pictorial, analogy in a way, is that what fundamentally makes an investment location attractive for people to live there. That's what it comes down to. What has that owner-occupier appeal?
Yep.
So why do people want to live in this location?
And so to just as a kind of a segue from there, like what is making sense for you at the moment? Obviously, there's lots of talk about different locations and whatnot. And I mean, at the time of release of this podcast, there's plenty of hype in and around Melbourne or Victoria as a region in general. What are your thoughts in terms of not necessarily just that market alone, but in terms of where you're seeing areas that make sense right now?
Look, it's where there's a lot of public and private investment. So I always look at, from a macro point of view, what that local economy is doing from a gross domestic product or gross state product point of view. So if you're looking at state level, you're obviously looking at sort of major city level as well. I tend to sort of look at locations that have at least populations of say 40 to 50,000 people.
Okay.
Just because there's population there and there's population growth doesn't necessarily correlate to capital growth. You need to unpack, well, what's in that economy, that local economy. So that local economy might be worth $2 billion a year, but 60% of that could be coming from one industry.
Yeah.
So then, for some investors with a very risk adverse appetite, a location like that just isn't
Might
going to
make
stack
sense.
up.
Yep.
So one, like something that sort of, might come to mind is a mining town, for example, or even, a location that might rely on mining, manufacturing, and maybe one other industry. I think, I like to look at it from a risk point of view to say, right, well, that insurance policy effect is right. Well, how can I de-risk that investment? It's an economy that's very diverse. It's a growing economy as well. How do I know it's growing? Well, availability of jobs, trends of unemployment rates, and where the job growth is occurring. Is it project related? Because a lot of areas at the moment, there's a lot of, as I said, public and private sort of investment. Public's obviously state governments, local governments, and federal governments. What you do have is if there's a lot of project related expenditure, then you're going to have that sort of transient sort of workforce as well.
Yep.
So you've got to factor that in as well. But ultimately, and what's interesting at the moment with Australia as a whole, we're an aging population. There's obviously a lot of migration there, which is essentially stabilising that median age.
Yep.
But what we're finding is that capital cities, obviously the median age is holding, but in a lot of regional locations, we're actually an aging population. So what are we looking for there? We're looking for a very diverse healthcare sector. So that might be sort of public hospital developments. It could be aged care investment, could be just general healthcare and allied health investment as well. But and what the growth of that sector is over the last sort of 10 to 20 years. So because I think that's obviously healthcare is a growing sector, but it's sectors like that and other robust sort of industries as well. Like you've got construction, you've got retail, you've got education. So locations that might have not only primary and secondary schools, but tertiary education
as well,
universities and stuff.
A lot of research, obviously, like even just what you just rattled off there's a lot of data that's going into in terms of your research into particular locations and particular markets. And that's you're not even overlaying specific types of assets within that location, the kind of breakdown in terms of purchase price, the rental yield that can be associated with those properties as well. That's
scratching the surface, because then once you've sort of understood the location, that's one part of it. The other part is, what's the property related data behind that? Because you can have tick all those boxes from a diversified economy, but then you overlay the property data on top and you go, there's a lot of population growth here. And you look at aerial photos and whatever else, you go, well, there's an abundance of supply there as well.
Yeah.
And I think, as we know as investors, supply and just general economics, supply and demand.
Yep.
So supply is the enemy of capital growth when it comes to property.
So if we were to kind of say, if you had to pick one camp or the other for this individual who's building out their portfolio, would you want that that specific asset to be a capital growth play, a cash flow play, a balance play? Explain.
I think it's
obviously we want it all.
Oh yeah, of course.
We'd love it all.
Yeah, you'd love to have 10% compound growth every year
with a 6% yield, right?
Absolutely, yeah, and pay 3% interest.
Yeah, but if you had to get kind of granular and go, well, what should the priority be as the foundation of those building blocks?
Yeah. Look, I think what I say to clients are, look, if you're on a modest income, you want the best of both worlds. You don't necessarily want to flock to the cash flow play because you are probably leaving some money on the table with capital growth. And that's probably that analogy back to that sort of mining industry is that you look at mining towns and you go, wow, why is it 11% yields? Well, you have a look at the capital growth performance over the last 30 years. There's a lot of volatility there.
Yep.
And I'd like to say to clients as well is that from a yield perspective, yield generally relates to risk. So the higher the yield, the higher the risk. So yeah, for anyone starting out, obviously income dependent. But if we're talking about a median income, like a single person that might be on $90,000 a year, that's sort of around the median or average income in Australia at the moment. You might have servicing of maybe that $600,000 thereabouts, $500,000-$600,000. You want to try to get into a location that's probably on the early phase of growth and does have decent sort of rental yield as well.
Why do you want the decent rental yield?
You want the decent rental yield because you want the fuel in the car. So you don't want to you want to be using another analogy. I'm good on analogies today. You want to try to be frugal and buy that sort of little 1.6 liter engine and not the twin turbo V6.
Yep.
I mean, gone are the days of the V8s now.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, you want something for that cash flow because cash flow relates to income, which relates to servicing.
And especially if, like you said, you're on that $90,000 income, for argument's sake,
Yep.
you might not be able to afford a negative $35,000 carry.
Exactly.
And you might be able to for property number one, but if you double that, you're going to run out of money very, very quickly.
Yeah. And I think if I'm just thinking very high level numbers, like say we're working on that sort of $550,000 to $600,000 purchase, there is going to be a component of negative cash flow, anywhere from about $10,000 to $15,000 a year. If you're in a very, very tight sort of yielding market, like in the threes, for example, or very high threes, low fours, you might be sort of in the high teens, and that's pre-tax dollars. So so someone who's on 90 grand, that's a big chunk.
And when you're trying to scale, that's when it becomes really, really difficult.
Yeah.
So we're kind of saying that balanced approach early is great. Let's start to talk about, because obviously the buy and hold approach is self-explanatory. It's go and buy assets and hold them for the long run. But in terms of what you're seeing and potentially helping clients do, is there a particular niche or sweet spot that you're seeing within the value add space, and what does that look like?
There is. So what I like looking for is, because I've got a property development background, I'm always looking for that future value play, and it is sort of underestimated when you're building a portfolio. When you do hit a serviceability cap, provided you've scaled a portfolio to a point with the right properties, there's different value add plays you can have, obviously with availability of capital as well. But there's varying extents of value add plays. So you can do just a cosmetic renovation.
Yep.
So that's paint, carpets, etc.
Would you do that for like capital appreciation, rental increase, a little bit of both?
Could be a little bit of both.
Yep.
So that's probably the sort of the one extreme of it, and then you go to the full extreme, which is obviously doing significant redevelopments, subdivisions, etc. But look, a pretty common one at the moment is the secondary dwelling or the dual occupancy play.
Yep.
It's and look, it doesn't work in all markets. It's very market dependent. I know in the east coast of Australia at the moment, look, it's the granny flats are very popular, in and around Sydney, Greater Sydney. So Greater Sydney, Wollongong, Newcastle. It's tried and tested in Queensland as well. Less so in Melbourne, Victoria at the moment, but it is probably trending upwards. I think it is a bit of a thing in WA as well. But look, if you're an asset holder and you want to increase yield, not necessarily capital value, that secondary dwelling can obviously give that little bit of serviceability and, and sort of move mountains when it comes to passive income.
So you said it's to help with the cash flow side of things and maybe not necessarily from a capital appreciation point of view. So would you say it would primarily be there for the ability to increase the income from that block? And what are some of the numbers look like roughly in terms of the build cost and what does that process look like?
Yeah. So look, I'll talk about some areas up just north of Sydney. So we've been sort of buying up around the Newcastle area for the best part of sort of 12 months or so now. So numbers wise, like you're buying an asset that's, if you're in that sort of, say, $800,000 purchase price or thereabouts, you're probably yielding anywhere from that sort of low to mid 4%.
Yep.
And then granny flats, like there's a whole different range of granny flat typologies or secondary dwelling typologies. You can go the in situ build, which, at the moment you're sort of anywhere from that sort of 180 to about 220, depending on...
What does that look like? Like, just explain the in situ build. What does that mean?
So basically, if you've got a 600 square meter block, you've got a small dwelling, maybe a 3-bed, 1-bath or something on the front.
Yep.
You might have adequate sort of clearances in the backyard to build another dwelling.
Yep.
In New South Wales, you do get sort of, you can use state government planning pathways to fast track approvals for secondary dwelling under 60 square metres.
Okay. Is that big enough? What does that get you? A 2-bedder?
Yeah. 60 square metres will get you a 2-bedder, a bathroom with probably a laundry cupboard or an enlarged bathroom laundry. And a centralized living space.
Yep.
But there's so many different sort of floor plans.
And that costs you, what did we say?
Anywhere from about 180 to 220.
Okay. Depending on what, like size, level of finishes.
Yeah, and site constraints. So there's obviously if you don't have that dimensional setback from the dwelling or from the rear boundary, you might have to add some fire rating.
Gotcha.
Same with if it's not quite a flat block, you might have some drop edge beams and whatever else, or some extra stumps and piers. So that's your in situ play, and you can obviously overspec and overcapitalize any which way you want. You can, a common one if you're an investor is to go with the weatherboard clad sort of look.
Yep.
The old FC sheeting around the side. But if you want that owner occupier appeal, then you can go brick veneer or whatever else.
Yeah. So we've taken that property from 800 to what, circa $1 million?
About $1 million. Let's say $1 million.
What is that? And then the yield was say low 4s. What's the yield going to be upon completion?
Look, you're probably sitting in the mid to high 5s at the moment.
Okay.
There has been some yield compression with obviously capital values going up.
Yep.
But you're getting closer to that, I guess, the cash rate on that debt.
Yep.
So if your nominal sort of interest rate on your debt's sitting around that sort of low 6s for an interest-only loan, you're getting close to bridging that gap.
Yep.
Obviously, you've got all your outgoing costs there as well.
But it's a lot closer to a neutral hold, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. In the early stages.
Yeah.
So we've gone the in situ granny. What else do we have?
So just before we move on from the grannies, there's a lot of, there's a lot of commentary and a lot of pros and cons about granny flats. A lot of people are anti-granny flat because like, well, it's only appealing for an owner-occupier.
Yeah.
It doesn't have that owner-occupier
appeal. It's only appealing to the investor, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So, but what I'm seeing now is that I've been to a lot of open homes that have a granny flat in place already. I'm surprised by the amount of owner-occupiers.
Who's there?
Multi-generational families.
Right.
So you've got the parents with maybe teenage kids. You've got and look, we're obviously Australia's going through a transition of a lot of migration as well. There's a vast range of cultures moving in Australia, and a lot of cultures do have that real connected family unit there. So you might have 3 or 4 families or close relatives of the families. So you might have 2 or 3 generations living under the one roof.
Mum and dad with the young kids, and then the grandparents.
Or maybe the
as the name suggests, the granny in the granny flat.
Yeah, exactly. So there is a market. Certainly, what I'm seeing in Sydney at the moment, there's a market for houses with granny flats that owner occupiers will buy them.
That's really interesting because that kind of goes against the grain in terms of what people would usually be drumming in, that it doesn't increase the value of the property and then you lose all owner-occupier appeal. I'm sure there's a sector of the market, but you're saying that there is also a sector of the owner-occupied space that does see value in that type of property.
Yeah, and definitely what we we're talking about before with the stay vesting type of clients is that there's a lot of people that have their kids living with them still that they don't want to live under the one roof because
they're teenagers and annoying,
or they're probably in their,
or they're
in their 30s even. It's like, okay, well, I'll go and spend a couple $100,000, go live in the backyard.
Yep, absolutely.
So that's obviously the granny flat and what I'm seeing in the marketplace at the moment. Obviously only in some markets, but another play at the moment. If I'm just focusing on New South Wales. The New South Wales government has really doing a good job at unlocking planning controls at the moment and providing some planning upside. That's creating a lot of controversy at the moment. You've got the NIMBY camp and you've got the YIMBY camp as well that are obviously pro housing and not in my backyard. Get away from here. But it's a pretty good solution that unlocks really the airspace above low density housing. And there's what I call that sort of that middle type of housing typology. In some areas in Greater Sydney, it's a new state government policy called the low mid-rise housing policy. In some of these areas across New South Wales, if you meet development standards of 450 square metre block, low density residential, you can generally do that fast track approval for the granny flat. But there are some areas under this new LMR policy where you can actually do other low mid-rise housing typologies. So around designated town centres, if you're familiar with what the state government's doing in Sydney at the moment, they're obviously unlocking a lot of housing around transport nodes. Yep. So the transport orientated development precincts. But then you have designated town centres in Newcastle, Lake Macquarie, Wollongong, Sydney, where the town centre might be a neighbourhood shopping centre. Within an 800-metre radius of that, you've got an additional permissibility to do things like duplexes.
Right.
And low-rise apartments as well.
Even low-rise apartments.
Yeah, so I think up to 3 stories.
And so, like for the investor, what's the play there? You go and acquire that site, hang on to it for a little bit, and then see if you could feasibly run that development yourself.
That's right. Yeah. So it's obviously acquiring something with today's philosophy in mind. Is it a good sound investment? Is it a good renter return? But looking at that sort of that planning upside in the future, obviously because you've got. The fundamentals of property development are, is it permissible and is it feasible? So it might not be feasible today, but it might be feasible in 10 years' time. When land values appreciate and that sort of typology and gentrification of that area changes over time.
Now, do I need to be a sophisticated investor to do either of these plays, the granny flat edition or something with development upside? I'm just a regular 9-to-5 worker. Like, this scares me a little bit. And can I do it in a location 2 hours away from where I live?
Yeah, look, it comes back down to the individual risk appetite. A buy and hold could be perfect because it could give an upside outcome in 10, 15 years' time. But
as in, you don't necessarily need to undertake the development, but you could sell it with development upside.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, there's plenty of developers out there and plenty of sort of less sophisticated investors that'll just buy something and then just luck will fall their way, and they'll be sitting on a gold mine.
What's it like to, say, for example, undertake, even if we just go back to the granny flat analogy, what's it like to undertake a granny flat build from a location that isn't in your own backyard? Yeah, look, it's I guess it's like anything. In the fundamentals of property investment, you've really got to build that strong team around you. So, I'd like to ensure that clients have, at the very least, they have got a good mortgage broker, a good accountant, maybe a financial advisor if they're older, and then looking at things like buying property in SMSF. And obviously when you're building a portfolio, you need to ensure you've got a good property manager as well. But I guess, if you're looking at these development plays and the like, it's just an extension of that team. So, it's really, the first point of call is, okay, well, to the property manager, well, who does your renovation projects? Do you have any licensed builders on your panel that do something a little bit bigger? Yep. Just ask the questions. So, I often ask property managers in locations, right, is there a market for a granny flat? Because it might not be.
There might not be. Is there a market? What's the townhouse market like? What's the duplex market like? Those sort of things. It's just asking questions, and then questions always lead to answers, and they start snowballing from there. But yeah, it's like anything. You just got to build that trusted team around you. And you might not get it right, but again, it's how much risk you want to bite off as well. Yeah, and if we go back to now we've spoken a little bit about value add plays, but if we go back to more of the passive buy and hold approach, so we've gone in, we've acquired a couple of kind of capital growth assets while we haven't neglected the cash flow overall. Are you seeing simply a buy and hold approach? Are you ever in the mindset of selling an asset to
reinvest to retire out debt, or is it just buy and hold and always buy and hold?
Look, I'm a big believer of the buy and hold strategy, but you've got to get to a point where you go, okay, well, you've held it. It's done a lot of the heavy lifting. You've got a lot of equity on paper, but what are you going to do with it? Do you want to retire the debt and then increase that sort of passive income level, or do you want to diversify again and change asset type?
So do you have like a personal philosophy that you would abide by? Is it like hold if you can afford to hold, or definitely incorporate a sale in there at some point?
Yeah, look, I think my investment philosophy is that, buy and hold, add value along the way, and then sort of bring it back to a goal of, when you're getting to, the sunset years of working, well, how much heavy lifting do you want your property portfolio to do when it comes to passive income? So, I don't put all my eggs in one basket. I like diversification. When it comes to property investing, I like diversifying location. Much like, do I want to draw all my income from property when I retire? Well, probably not. I want other forms of assets that are producing income as well.
And that's the important thing as well, right? That people don't really think about. But overall, you've kind of got there. Your journey to wealth creation has at least started and fostered through property, and whether or not it stays that way into retirement, or whether you diversify into other asset classes, or you just continue to buy and hold those properties. I suppose you're better off having those assets than not having bought them in the first place.
Yeah. No, that's right. But look, I think that just suits my approach, my risk appetite. You can ride waves of growth markets where you're basically transacting. You're in and out. And look, I know there's a lot of people that did that over COVID. You're buying these growth markets that are appreciating at 20, 30%, annualized a year. But to an extent, I think those days are gone now because affordability is
been shot, right?
Has been shot through. But I think for me, like it's buy and hold, add value where it makes sense to either add value, that development play, or to sell the asset to pay down some debt due to a life event or whatever it might be, then yeah. But I'm a big believer of the buy and hold strategy. And
obviously you've been someone who's been doing it for a couple of decades. So you've got the runs on the board and the kind of the past learned experience to at least kind of guide you through that journey, which is wonderful. So in kind of wrapping up the pod today, I've absolutely loved the conversation. I've learned a whole heap, and I hope the listeners have as well. Is there this kind of one key takeaway that you could give the investor, be it a first timer or a seasoned investor, in terms of an overarching lesson learnt that maybe you were burnt along the way, or you've seen a past client that you'd be able to potentially give to one of the listeners?
Yeah, it's probably, when it comes to property investing, it's be completely agnostic to the asset you're looking at as well. Don't worry about if it's got pink walls or a 20-year-old kitchen. You're not living in it. And that for me, and it's that back to that sort of thought process about you've got to buy in your own backyard as investment. You don't have to. I mean, I've got one up in north of Brisbane that I think I've driven past once in 4 years.
And that's it.
That's it. And look, I've had squatters in it. I've had to evict 2 tenants.
All the fun stuff.
But it's gone up in value.
Exactly.
I think, and that's the bigger picture. If you're buying well and you're buying in a market that is going to grow over time, I think that's why we're in the game, right?
Exactly right.
We want to see that sort of value go up over time. But I think that's sort of my
no, mate, that's absolutely beautiful.
And I think it's just don't get sort of so paralyzed as well about what about this, what about that. Like particularly at the moment, the more paralyzed you are, the more picky you are about a particular asset. It's an opportunity cost.
That market could move away from you.
Yeah. And I've just seen that. And just look, things can't go on forever. Look, there is going to be market cycles coming up. I mean, who knows when there's another retraction in property markets at the moment. I think from a supply demand point of view, it's hard to see, but there is going to be an affordability ceiling.
Something will happen at some point.
Something has to happen. Just in the last 20 years where I've been buying and selling property, there's been the GFC, we've had COVID, we've had APRA come in and put sort of constraints on lending that has an effect on the property market as well. So there is going to be something. So I think that's something to remember as well, is that we're in good times in the property market at the moment. It's not going to last forever.
Really, really, really impressive takeaway there, because and that's why I love chatting with you. It's not dream selling. It's not rose-colored glasses. It's down to earth. It's real chat.
Yeah. But look, and back to what I said earlier, property is a get-rich-slow scheme. There's going to be bumps along the way.
Fabulous stuff. Adam from Actuate Property, it was absolutely wonderful having you on the podcast, mate. We might have to do round 2 sometime soon.
Yeah, I'd love to.
Fabulous stuff. Thanks again, mate.
All right. Thanks, Joey.